Welcome to Miyconst Hardware. Right now AliExpress is running a back to school campaign where you can find some decent deals. That's why I decided to make an overview of AliExpress offers to see what I personally find interesting or theoretically interesting and could be a good option to buy. But first, I would like to remind you that Russian terroristic invasion of Ukraine is not over yet. The war continues and we need your support as much as ever. With this, I would like to share a fundraising and a video from Broe. He is a rather famous English-speaking YouTuber who covers events in Ukraine. So if you would like to stay up to date, then feel free to subscribe to his channel. But for now, I'm asking you to check just one of his videos, see what you think, and if you have a possibility to support Ukraine, please support his fundraising.
Now that's a lot of money. Where did it all go? And in total, we purchased and fixed up 30 pickup trucks and more than 500 FPV drones. As of last weekend, it's all been officially delivered. It took 3 months to purchase and fix up and deliver 30 trucks and 500 drones.
Now back to the boring stuff, AliExpress. Here, once again, I need to remind you that in my opinion, AliExpress is the very last place to buy electronics and the very last place to spend your money. If you have a possibility, please buy something on your local second-hand market or just in the local stores, even if it is just a bit more expensive. Still, if you have to buy something from AliExpress, remember to always record unboxing video and take high-resolution detailed pictures of what you have received. With such videos and such photos, you may have a chance to receive some sort of a warranty support or maybe just get a refund for a defective product from AliExpress. Lastly, the prices specified in my presentation are actual for today. What's gonna happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, I have no idea. Also, I specify all the prices without the VAT tax, so please don't tell me that in the Netherlands or in Germany you see a different price. That's because Netherlands and Germany add VAT tax on top automatically. This also happens to many other countries. VAT tax is different for every country, that's why I cannot include this VAT tax into my spreadsheets and into my presentations. So depending on your VAT tax, your price will be a bit higher than what I show or much higher. And if you use links from my presentation, I may or may not get a few cents from AliExpress. This is up to AliExpress and I have no clue for which purchases of yours using my links I get some payments and for which I don't. At the same time, I cannot guarantee quality of any of the linked products, the risk is fully yours. I also cannot recommend any of the AliExpress stores as a trustworthy store, because all of them have issues, all of them happen to send defective products, and all of them will try to deny warranty claims whenever is possible. With this, let's go into the actual offers that I personally find attractive. This time I'm not going to start with individual components, instead I'm going to see what you can get from AliExpress as an entire PC base if you have 300–350 euros. So according to me, the best option would be Ryzen 5 5600, which you can buy right now for less than 60 euros from AliExpress. And for the motherboard, I picked this Soyo B550M that costs about 50–51 euros. The B550 chipset means that you get PCI Express 4.0, and the motherboard also has 2 PCI Express X16 slots, NVMe slot, 2 DDR4 RAM sticks, a couple of SATA, and so on. So yeah, it's not the best motherboard, but it's also not the worst, and it's pretty decent for 50 euros. For memory, I went with the cheapest Clisre 16 gigs, 2 sticks 8 GB each, DDR4 3200. Sure, you would probably try to overclock it to DDR4 3600, but that's not guaranteed. For SSD, I have this Crucial P3 1TB, because 500 gigs or half a terabyte would cost you 33 euros and 1 terabyte would cost you less than 50 euros. For myself, I would not buy those KingSpec, KingDien or other Chinese brands. It is better to pay a bit extra and get reliable Crucial storage. For GPU, I have this Soyo RX 6600M. The 6600M GPUs in a desktop implementation work with the standard AMD drivers, unlike Nvidia versions. For example, Nvidia RTX 3060 and 3070M are available in desktop options on AliExpress, but those Nvidia GPUs do not work with the standard Nvidia drivers and they need modified drivers, so you don't have update options. In case of RX 6600M, some time ago I have tested one of these on my channel, and the GPU performs just like the standard RX 6600 and works with the standard official AMD drivers. For this particular one you would have to pay about 145 euros, and I think it's one of the best deals on AliExpress. All in all, this entire build would cost you about 330 euros plus VAT. If for whatever reason you're an Intel fanboy and you want an Intel configuration, then I would go with the i3-12100F that right now costs a bit more than Ryzen 5 5600, about 64 euros. For that reason I had to pick the cheapest H610 motherboard, and it happens to be this Huananji H610M VH. The motherboard does not have any VRM cooling, and the VRM itself is pretty bad or pretty pathetic, but at the same time the motherboard has all the required connectivity, and for i3-12100, i5-12400 you don't really need much better VRM than this. The motherboard costs less than 50 euros, so the total price is about the same, 330 euros between Ryzen 5 5600 and i3-12100 builds. Now, if you want some more GPU performance, then it is possible to build a Xeon E5 system, and for that I picked EPYC 2680 V4 that right now costs only 11 euros. For the motherboard I went with the old and verified Machinist X99 RS9. Right now it costs less than 35 euros. The motherboard has all the required connectivity, it has quad memory channel configuration, not the best VRM, but the VRM is good enough for 2680 V4. For the memory, I decided to go with exactly the same Clisram memory sticks, 2 sticks, 8GB each, for about 20-21 euros. But here you gotta be very careful, because very often Chinese DDR4 memory has compatibility issues with the Chinese X99 motherboards. When buying such memory from AliExpress, make sure to text the seller and ensure compatibility with your motherboard, otherwise you will end up with memory that doesn't work with your motherboard. For the SSD, I stick with the same Crucial P3 for 1TB, and for the graphics card we can get this MLSE or MLSE or whatever it is supposed to be called, RTX 3060 with 12 gigs of video memory that cost about 205-206 euros. So 12 gigs of video memory and significantly faster than RX 6600, and the total build price is about the same, 330 euros, but you're getting outdated X99 platform with the Xeon E5 2680 V4. In my opinion, out of these three configurations, Ryzen 5 5600 is the best option, i3-12100 is the second option, and E5 2680 V4 is the last option. But depending on your priorities and depending on what games you play, it might be the other way around for you. So pick what you like and pick what fits you best. The next slide is about LGA2011 version 3 platform, and here we have some interesting CPUs and some interesting motherboards. Starting with the CPUs, we have the cheapest E5 2666 V3 that works with the DDR3 and DDR4. Right now it costs basically less than a cup of coffee for about 6 to 7 euros. With the DDR3 you could build an ultra budget gaming configuration and get pretty decent performance. Then you can also take a look at E5 2697 V3 that has 14 cores and costs just 15 euros. With the Turbo Boost unlock, the performance of this E5 2697 V3 will be better than any other or almost any other E5 V4 CPU. At the same time, the CPU will consume significantly more power, but that's the sacrifice. Then we have E5 2680 V4 for just 11 euros that I have already mentioned. E5 2690 V4 for about 27 euros. This one is not proportionally more expensive, because the performance compared to E52680v4 is not that much better, but the price is about or more than double. Still, overall, E52690v4 is pretty close to E52697v3, and that's noticeably faster than E52680v4, but the price is also not the best. Then we also have E52697AV4 with the 16 cores and the price tag of almost 40 euros. The CPU is good, the price is not very good. And finally, I also have picked E52697, not AV4. This one has 18 cores instead of 16 cores. Just like with the A version, E52697v4 is a decent CPU, especially if you need raw CPU power with a reasonable power consumption, but the price of 52 euros is not the best. So if you already have a dual-socket LGA2011 version 3 platform and want to have an upgrade, it might be a good idea. Building from scratch, I would skip. For the motherboard, as the cheapest option, I would go with the RS9 because it has quad memory channel configuration, BIOS from iEngineer, TPM 2.0 support, and the price tag of less than 35 euros. Then, of course, you can also take a look at this Miyconst X99K9 if you value the real X99 C612 chipset, or if you badly want a white motherboard for whatever reason, but in that case you would have to pay almost 70 euros for this motherboard. I personally would skip it, but maybe it's a right one for you. My favorite, the go-to option of Chinese X99 motherboards, is now down to just 45 euros. This is Miyconst X99 MR9A, and the motherboard has much better VRAM than RS9, and it also has more connectivity options. At the same time, it still has a BIOS from iEngineer and TPM 2.0 support. So if I would be buying for myself, if I have ATX chassis, I would go with MR9A, and if I have a micro ATX chassis, I would go with X99 RS9. Sure, you can also take a look at this Chieda X99 E5 or E5A99. The motherboard is basically a copy of a Miyconst X99 MR9A, and sometimes they are available even for cheaper. It works with the same BIOS, it also has support from iEngineer BIOS, and TPM 2.0 is also supported. In this particular case, the motherboard is sold in a bundle with E52680v4 and 32 gigs of RAM, and for the whole bundle you would have to pay about 102 euros. If it's good or bad, you need to decide for yourself, it depends on the price of the individual components and so on. Finally, if you're looking for a dual socket solution, my latest recommendation is Miyconst X99 D8 Max. For this motherboard, BIOS iEngineer has already made a decent BIOS, and we have hope to get TPM 2.0 support. Right now there are some complications with the development because of some defect or issues with the motherboard itself. But in general, if you really badly want a dual socket motherboard from AliExpress, then my recommendation would lay onto Miyconst X99 D8 Max. At the same time, I would strongly recommend to go to eBay and search for Dell T5810 and Dell T7810 workstations. These workstations right now are available for dirty cheap, and sometimes you can find them in bare-bone configuration or with some RAM, some CPUs and so on. Especially if you also need to buy a chassis and a power supply, it might be a very good cost-saving option. Sure, it is much harder with the Dell workstations to do Turbo Boost Unlock, but with the V4 CPUs you don't need Turbo Boost Unlock. And yes, you will not get features such as resizable bar and RAM timings, but you don't really need these features for a stable, reliable workstation or a server. Moving to the next slide, I have LGA1700 from Intel, and here I picked only two CPUs because the rest are overpriced, and a plethora of different motherboards. So starting with the CPU is of course i3-12100F. Even though the CPU has only 4 cores, it delivers pretty decent gaming performance and sometimes even beating Ryzen 5 5600 in certain games. The price of 63-64 euros is also pretty decent, but if you can spend a bit more, then take a look at i5-12490F. This CPU is slightly better than 12400F because it has slightly higher clock frequency and a bit more L3 cache, and this L3 cache really helps in gaming. For this i5 you would have to pay about 109-110 euros, so a bit more pricey than the i3. For the motherboards, I will start with this trusty MSI H610. I have personally assembled several dozens of computers using this MSI motherboard. Of course, the MSI board I bought in my local stores, not from AliExpress, but none of the motherboards from MSI had any issues. All of these motherboards are working with i3-12100s and i5-12400s. Some of them are even with the i5-13400 and i5-13500. So far, not a single issue, and even though the motherboard looks pretty naked and has minimal connectivity options, it's a decent option. Unfortunately, the AliExpress price is not the best. You would have to pay about 67-68 euros for this MSI motherboard. If for whatever reason you want to have something more unique, then you can also pay the same 67 euros to get a Maxsun H610 option with about the same VRAM and about the same connectivity options as MSI, just it is Maxsun. So if you don't want to go MSI, you can get the same thing under Maxsun name. Maxsun also has this DDR5 option, and unlike the DDR4 version, the DDR5 version has this tiny pathetic VRAM radiator. I guess it's better than nothing, but still the VRAM is pretty bad, and I would not install here anything higher than i5-13500. We still have a very limited connectivity, but we get DDR5 support, and for that you would have to pay 76 euros, which is not ideal, but if you want DDR5, yeah, you pay a bit more. Another interesting option is this Maxsun Mini ITX motherboard, and why I find it interesting is because it costs just 92 euros, it has pretty decent VRAM cooling, and it also comes with a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, which is not very common for cheap Mini ITX motherboards. So I kinda like this tiny Mini ITX Maxsun motherboard and could potentially buy it for myself if I would need such one. Alternative would be this Maxsun B760 ITX D5 motherboard. It's also Mini ITX, but as you can see, the VRAM radiator is significantly larger. The motherboard also comes with a B760 chipset, means you have memory overclocking options, and this is DDR5. It is not DDR4. So if I would have a bit more money to pay, I would probably buy this B760 instead of the H610, but for this one you would have to pay about 103-105 euros. Huananji also has a couple of LGA1700 offers, and the first one I have already mentioned is this absolutely naked, the cheapest possible H610 motherboard for less than 50 euros. Even though the motherboard looks pretty pathetic and pretty scary for i3-12100 and i5-12400, it will be just enough, and I still believe that this absolutely minimal H610 motherboard would be better than going with the outdated LGA2011-3 platform. For a bit more money, in particular for about 64 euros, you can also get B760 motherboard from Huananji. This one has somehow decent VRAM cooling, and I hope somehow better VRAM. The motherboard still supports DDR4 memory and still has pretty limited connectivity, but this time we get PCI Express X4 and 2 M.2 slots, so for the price increase we're getting quite some extra features. So again, if you have more money, this is a much better option than this absolutely naked H610 motherboard. For ITX lovers, Huananji has an offer for just 82 euros, and this is this one B660M ITX motherboard that I have already tested. It's a pretty decent motherboard. It has 4 SATA, PCI Express X16, M.2 slot, pretty okay VRM and cooling, and DDR4 support, and all of that in a white package you get for just 82 euros. So if you're hunting for a white Mini ITX motherboard, then this one might be just the one you're searching for. The last motherboard that caught my attention is this Maxon B760M. This one is micro ATX and it has much beefier VRM and much better VRM cooling. The motherboard is available in DDR4 version, for which you would have to pay about 88 euros, and in DDR5 version, for which you will have to pay about 92 euros. You can decide if it is worth to pay a bit extra for the DDR5 version or you want the good old DDR4 option. Both of the motherboards have pretty limited connectivity. You get two AM.2 slots, one PCI Express X16, one PCI Express X1, and a couple of SATA ports. It's pretty okay, pretty standard, and enough for a decent gaming PC. AMD AM4 platform also has its own dedicated slide. Here we don't have as many motherboards, but we have 3 instead of 2 CPUs. So if you're looking for the cheapest possible Ryzen CPU that I could recommend, then this would be Ryzen 5 3500 for about 39 euros. I do not recommend this CPU and I would rather pay a bit extra and get Ryzen 5 5600, but if you absolutely need the cheapest Ryzen AM4 CPU, then Ryzen 5 3500X from AliExpress, that's probably what I would pick. Ryzen 5 5600 I have already mentioned at the beginning of the video, and that would be my go-to option for AliExpress builds because right now it costs less than 60 euros. Alternatively, if you have higher budget, then Ryzen 7 5700X 3D is a very attractive option. Right now it costs just 146 euros, and with that X3D cache it will deliver very good and very decent gaming performance. For the motherboards, we can start with this ultra pathetic Maxon MS Challenger B450M motherboard, which has basically no VRM, but still this is enough for Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5. I would definitely not install Ryzen 7 on this motherboard, and right now it costs about 43 euros. So for the price I would avoid it and pay just a bit extra and get this Soyo B550M for about 50-51 euros. Basically the same Soyo B550M you can also find under the Maxon Terminator name. The layout is almost identical. The only difference I can spot is that the Maxon option has metal reinforced PCI Express X16 slots. So if you want to pay extra for that, then it's available for the price of 71-72 euros. I would definitely go with the Soyo and forget about those reinforced slots. If you're up for some second-hand deals, then I have assembled a couple of computers using this ASRock B450M motherboard. In general, the motherboard is good, the quality is good, and I did not have any complaints. With Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7 it works no problem. The problem is that the motherboard is used, and when you're buying used stuff from AliExpress, some of you will get a decently functioning motherboard in a good shape, and some of you will get absolute crap, so you would have to fight with AliExpress to get your money back. Another interesting second-hand option from AliExpress is this ASRock Fatality X470 in mini ITX format for just 82-83 euros. Having a mini ITX motherboard from a known brand such as ASRock and with AM4 socket for just 83 euros, it's not very common you can get on AliExpress. At the same time, the motherboard is used, so all the traditional warnings apply here as well. You can receive a fully functional motherboard, you may also receive some sort of a crap or a partially crashing motherboard. In general, whenever you are buying an AMD motherboard from AliExpress, make sure that the motherboard supports your CPU. You can also ask the seller to flash compatible BIOS, and if you did that and the seller confirmed that the BIOS is compatible with your CPU, but the motherboard does not work with your CPU, then you could get your money back, because the seller promised you compatibility with your CPU. AMD AM4 platform has so many different CPUs, and not every motherboard supports all the CPUs at the same time. Very often you need to update BIOS to use a new CPU with an old motherboard, so it might be a bit of a challenge, and that's why it's very important to ensure that the motherboard you buy from AliExpress is compatible with your CPU. Moving on to AM5, I don't have much to say. The platform is rather new and AliExpress offers are not that great. Starting with the CPUs, I have only two things I could theoretically buy from AliExpress. The first one is Ryzen 5 7500F for about 145 euros, which is not great, but somehow acceptable. And the Ryzen 5 7600X. So for this one, you would have to pay almost 200 euros. If you really badly want that X and a sign in your CPU name and you want integrated graphics or iGPU, then you would have to pay. In all other cases, I would just go with the 7500F. For the motherboards, it turns out that Huananji already has some AM5 offers, and the first one would be this ultra simple AM5 B650M motherboard. The motherboard has all the required connectivity for a simple gaming PC. It even comes with a simple VRM heatsink, but I would definitely not install a Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 in here. A Ryzen 5 is the max I would go on this motherboard, and I did not test it, so I don't know anything about the quality or the BIOS options, but for 82-83 years, that's the best I could find. Huananji also has a slightly enhanced version, which is called the B650 Plus. The motherboard has a significantly better connectivity. We have two PCI Express X16 slots, two AM.2 slots. We also have more SATA ports. Let me see, this one has 4 SATA and this one has 4 SATA. Okay, it's 4 SATA on both of them. But what's more important is that the VRM on the Plus version is significantly better and the VRM heatsinks are much larger. So on this one, I would probably install Ryzen 7, but again, I don't know if it has any quality, RAM compatibility, or BIOS issues. So theoretically, you could buy one for testing, but I can't yet recommend it. If I would have to recommend something from AliExpress, then I would most likely go with this Maxsun MS B660M Wi-Fi. The motherboard is pretty basic, but the price is also not too high. It's just 86 euros, which is in line with the cheap B650 offer from Huananji. At the same time, the Maxsun offer comes with a Wi-Fi card on board, with a larger VRM heatsink, and in general, from my experience, Maxsun provides much better motherboards than Huananji. At least it was like this with all the tested motherboards on this channel. DDR5 is still a bit expensive and the AliExpress offers aren't that plentiful, yet I found a couple options. So the first one would be this King Bank, and you can get 32 gigs of DDR5 6000 for about 86 euros. It's nothing great, but if you have to buy from AliExpress, then I guess that's what I would go with. You can also go with the standard Corsair DDR5. Here you can have 16 gigs DDR5 6000 for about 42 euros, and probably I would go that way, because if you're building a PC from AliExpress, then you're trying to save every last bit, and 16 gigs is still enough for most of the games. This time I also have a dedicated slide for workstations or servers when you need lots of raw CPU power and lots of connectivity, and you do not play games. In that case, I would like to bring your attention to used Dell 7820 and 7920 workstations. Sometimes these can be found on eBay for 400-500 euros in various different configurations, bare bones or with some basic CPU RAM installed. In general, if you need to build a whole workstation or a whole server, then this could be a good money investment, because you get the chassis, the power supply, the quality motherboard for a very reasonable price. At the same time, you are not getting any customization options, upgradability is also very questionable, and the BIOS is fully locked. What's more annoying is that these workstations do not support high TDP CPUs. As far as I know, Dell T7820 supports only up to 165 watts TDP. I am not yet sure about 7920, and maybe I'm wrong about 7820, maybe it can support CPUs up to 205 watts, but I did not find evidence for that. If you don't want to go the Dell route, then you can hunt for dual-socket Intel S2600 motherboards on eBay. Sometimes they show up on eBay for 200-300 euros, especially if you have a possibility to buy some local deals, like this one in Germany, for example. For just 230 euros, you get this Intel S2600 STBR motherboard for two LGA3647 CPUs and with lots of connectivity on the motherboard. Also, Intel quality is far beyond everything what AliExpress can offer. So far, I have bought one of these for myself and did some basic testing, and in general, I am pretty happy with the motherboard, but I can't tell much yet. The motherboard booted up with my 6268CL with no issues, while my Supermicro X11 SPI would require BIOS modifications to work with the Xeon Gold 6268CL. Speaking about Supermicro X11 SPI TF, this one, sometimes on eBay you can find them also for about 300 euros, but mostly they are overpriced. Nevertheless, this is a pretty decent motherboard, and the BIOS engineer made a good custom BIOS for this board. If you're interested in that BIOS, feel free to reach out to him via Patreon and see if he would be willing to sell it, because as of right now, it's not available for direct purchase from Patreon. BIOS engineer also modified my X11 SPI to support 240 watt CPUs, so I hope to use it in the future for some more tests for YouTube. If you're willing to spend even more on your motherboard and you still want to stay with LGA3647, then take a look at the ASRock offers. These motherboards are very good, the quality is top-notch, the connectivity is also very decent, but the price is also 500 to 600 euros just for the motherboard. The LGA3647 CPUs are going down in price with every day, and right now you can find Xeon Gold 6138 for about 30-35 euros, which is a very good deal. According to the specification, we get 20 cores, 3.7 GHz turbo frequency, 2.7 27 MB L3 cache, DDR4 2666, but only 125 watt TDP. 125 watt TDP means that these 20 cores will clock rather low under full load. If you want something a bit more powerful, then take a look at the Xeon Gold 6150. This one is available for about 80 to 100 euros, and it comes with 165 watt TDP. Even though it has only 18 cores, the higher TDP means that the CPU will boost higher and the overall performance will be better than the 20-core 6138. What's good about these two cheap CPUs is that they are 125 and 165 watts, and that means they are compatible with the Dell 7820, unlike the last CPU I picked, which is Xeon Gold 6275CL. This one is a 240 watt CPU, but it has 24 cores, 3.9 GHz turbo frequency, 35 MB L3 cache, and DDR4 2933. For this frying pan, you would have to pay about 300-350 euros on eBay, and you also need to find a motherboard which is compatible with the CPUs that need 240 watts of power. I have almost no experience with AMD EPYC CPUs, so I can't say anything for sure, but just scrolling through eBay, I found an interesting option, which is AMD EPYC 7K62. This CPU is available for about 300 euros from China, and it has 48 cores. The CPU has 225 watt TDP and the clock frequency up to 3.4 GHz. At the same time, CPU has 256 MB of L3 cache. Just compare it, 256 MB against 35 MB with the 24 cores on the Intel side. The CPU also supports DDR4 3200, unlike Intel, which is limited to DDR4 2933. In theory, this CPU is supposed to work in a Supermicro H11 SSL motherboard, but I cannot guarantee that. The Supermicro motherboard is available on eBay also for about 350 euros, so in theory that shall be a much more performant and much more power efficient package than LGA3647, but since I did not test EPYC, I don't know what kind of issues or caveats we can have there, so this is just theory. If you have some information about this 7K62 CPU, then I would like to hear about your experience or about your knowledge. My pre-last slide covers the GPU offers on AliExpress. In general, I strongly recommend to stay away from GPUs that are sold on AliExpress, but if you're limited or desperate and you need to buy a GPU, then this is what I would go with. So starting with the ultra cheap option, which is Soyo RX 580. The GPU costs just 61 euros and it has 8 gigs of video memory. At the same time, it is still somehow powerful enough to play even the latest games at very reduced graphical quality. The next option is this Soyo RX 5700 XT that also has 8 gigs of video memory, but it is much stronger. The price is about 142 euros, which is not that bad. In general, I would probably skip this 5700 XT in favor of 6600M. The performance between these two GPUs is very similar, and 6600M costs just a bit more. At the same time, 6600M is significantly more power efficient and it is also newer. So you can see here 6600M has only one 8-pin power connector, while the 5700 XT, let me find it, here it is, it has 8-pin and 6-pin power connectors. So with the same performance and about the same price, I see no reason why not to go with the 6600M if it delivers same thing for same price, but it is newer and consumes much less electricity. Cheap Nvidia GPUs on AliExpress is a mission impossible. Still, I found a couple of potentially interesting options. So first one is this MLLSE RTX 3060 for 12 gigs that I have already mentioned at the beginning of the video. The graphics card is significantly faster than RX 6600 and it also has 12 gigs of video memory, so the price tag of about 205-206 euros could be justified. The other option is this Soyo RTX 3060 Ti. Even though the graphics card has only 8 gigs of video memory, 3060 Ti is noticeably faster than the vanilla 3060. The price is also not that bad at about 230 euros. If you're limited to AliExpress, I could justify it. It also looks nice in white, at least according to me. Finally, if you want to go even higher, you can take a look at the 4060 offers from AliExpress. From the same Soyo store, you can find them for about 330 euros, but some other dodgy options are available for about 300 euros, and some more premium ones are going for 350-400 euros. And with that, I don't have much more to offer in terms of GPUs from AliExpress. My final slide is about random useful things or just something people asked me about. So starting with the CH341A programmer, which basically every X99 owner need. The original version of this programmer was black and looked like this. It did not have a voltage switch, so it would always run at 5 volts and that could burn your BIOS chip. This one upgraded version has voltage switch from 1.8 to 5 volts, so you no longer need to worry or make modifications of your programmer. The switch just works and you can pick the voltage right for your chip. Still, according to BIOS Engineer, this EZP 2019 programmer is better than CH341A. I personally have not tested this one, but BIOS Engineer recommended it, and I can pass on this recommendation to you. Sometimes we want to install all CPU coolers onto LGA1700 motherboards, but the mounting is not there. Then you can buy such option or such bracket plus backplate from AliExpress. I have personally tested a couple of those and I really like this one. It is cheap, it is simple. Well, cheap. It is about 2.5 euros for just the CPU cooler mount. I'm not sure if that counts as cheap, but if you have a decent cooler that you badly want to reuse, then this is a decent mount. With the backplate, metal screws instead of clips, and this kind of mounting ring, it's pretty solid and pretty decent. I like it. Every now and then people ask me about my test bench that you can see in my videos, and this is this one. It's called mining frame open chassis frame. I don't know what it is about mining. It's just an open air test bench, can be used for anything. I use it for doing my videos and doing some sort of testing benchmarks and so on. So far, I don't have any complaints, and I use it basically every day. I really like it, and you can see there is an eATX version, which means extended ATX. So even the large dual socket CPU motherboards fit in here. If you want it, if you need it, feel free to buy one. It costs just over 20 euros. Another interesting piece of hardware is this Odroid H4 SBC. It's available in H4, H4 Plus and H4 Ultra options, so you can pick different configuration depending on what you need. Odroid is a Korean company, it's not a Chinese company, so the quality and the support in general is much better, and I use one of these for my personal NAS and I really like it. So if you need something like this for your custom DIY project, or you just need a mini or even smaller than mini ITX computer with a low power consumption and still great connectivity options, I can recommend Odroid H4 for that. Of course, you can buy them from their official website, but if that's not available, you can also get them from AliExpress. On AliExpress, you can also find various different options for mini ITX NAS motherboards, like for example this one that costs just 120 euros, comes with Intel N100 CPU, 6 SATA ports, 4 2.5 gigabit Ethernet adapters, 2 M.2 slots, and all of that in mini ITX package for just 120 euros, like I said. It sounds too good to be true, and that's because it is too good to be true. Unfortunately, reading through multiple online reviews and feedbacks, I can say that the quality and support of these motherboards is far from ideal. Many people complain about the different hardware issues, there are no drivers for Windows, and there is absolutely no support. Is it a different hardware option from AliExpress? Yes. Is it something you could use for your DIY project? Probably yes. Is it something I would recommend? Well, no, at least not before I test it and see myself that it can be safely used. Before that, I would only recommend it as a toy for non-mission critical devices if you want something to just play around and not something you want to run in your home or office 24/7 with reliable storage access. Finally, I would like to say a few words about these 3D printable chassis from Modcase. They offer different designs for mini ITX, micro ATX computers, as well as a stackable chassis for NAS. This stackable NAS chassis can be configured in SSD-only chassis when you have just one block. Then you can have the main block plus a hard drive bay block for 4 or 5 HDDs, or you can have two of these blocks together. Let me open this link and show you. So you can have two blocks together like over here, or you can have this block on top. So you would have two HDD bays and one core module with a total up to 10 hard drives. If you like these designs and you have a 3D printer, or you have someone who can 3D print it for you, then feel free to use my discount code Miyconst10 to get a 10% discount. Here I need to mention that I'm not affiliated and I'm not getting paid for this promotion. It's just I personally really like this NAS design. I also personally really like this Evo design, and I printed a couple of this chassis. And the author or the owner of this design decided to grant me this discount code to share with my subscribers. If you like the design, feel free to buy. If no, I don't mind. With that, I have to say, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, good luck shopping on AliExpress, and see you in the next videos.